Good morning, everybody. Good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world. It's morning here where I am in the UK. And my name's Zarina, for those of you that are new here. And if you're a subscriber, thank you so much for coming back. And I hope you all enjoy the video. Welcome. Today's video, and don't forget to subscribe if you do enjoy my content and hit the notification bell so you don't miss future videos from me. Today's video is something that I thought quite a lot about lately, and I've just had recently a little bit of a triggering experience, and it was interesting because it's in those experiences that I personally, and I guess others would also see the actual growth and progression we've made in ourselves. I think what's interesting is that we can know that there's something we need to get better at, and we can keep practicing, reminding ourselves that we want to get better at that thing, and maybe, preventively stay focused on it and keep that mindset. But the true tests will come when we are faced with situations that trigger that particular part of us. And the reason why I wanted to do this video is because very recently, past couple of days, I was sort of triggered and faced with a situation that in the past would be very difficult for me to deal with and overcome and sort of manage emotionally. And it was a really interesting exercise that on this occasion, what I managed to do is, when the thing happened, is I did feel triggered and it did make me feel upset. But I recognized that, and I recognized that these are emotions and that this is temporary and that it is a response I have to this specific situation. And I almost felt aware of the fact that I've got a choice and that I know that the emotions are fleeting, and I almost know that tomorrow I'll feel different. And the reason I wanted to do this video is just to share with anybody that's watching, or maybe even going through a similar situation, and you find yourself just being re-triggered, and maybe it's very upsetting, maybe it's angering, maybe it really knocks you emotionally, and it really takes it out of you, because that's how I kind of used to feel when something used to trigger me emotionally. So for example, a situation I can kind of think of is when in a previous relationship I used to have arguments, let's say, with my partner, and because I really wanted to get my point across, and in that moment they weren't able to really understand where I was coming from or get what I'm saying, I used to just keep pushing and keep trying to make them understand my point. Whereas now, reflecting later in my life, is that sometimes people need time to process, and we need time for space for emotions to almost like simmer down, for things to be processed, to be sort of taken in by the other person, taken in by both parties. And sometimes you need time for that. And the other thing that's important is everybody has their own sort of triggers. Everybody has their own reactions to things. And it may be that when something happens, our initial reaction is quite strong, and it's almost like a response that's conditioned, almost like an immediate automatic response that's not necessarily good or bad. It's just a wiring that happens straight away to that situation. Now, if we can be aware of the fact that we're going to have that reaction, then it's almost like, okay, I understand why this happens. So we don't make that reaction into everything. So for example, for me in the past, it's like that reaction, that feeling I got was like the only way it could be. And I was right and they were wrong. And it was so upsetting and it was so painful and it would so take over my mindset. And then I was just like a dog with a bone, quite literally. And I was not letting go of that emotion. Now, as I've gotten older and kind of matured in my emotional sort of processing of what's happening, I understand that sometimes we are triggered by things, and sometimes a certain situation can bring out that response in us. Now, when I say a response and a triggering thing, I mean it could be even as deep as like when you were a kid. I don't know, when someone walked away, or like you've had people come in and out of your life, that now you feel like when someone's taking space or someone needs to have a little bit of time to themselves, it, as an example, it triggers like an abandonment issue. It triggers you to think this person doesn't love me, this person doesn't care for me. And I use that as an example that it can be something as unconscious and subconscious as that goes way, way back to something else. So it's actually in no relation appropriate for the situation you're currently going through. But if you understand, you know, the kind of triggers you may have, if you understand why they may be happening, I mean, you don't even need to know why, but you can readjust yourself to understand that here are a few things that help me. Number one, situations can trigger us, and often it can be a subconscious wiring that we've got, potentially from childhood, potentially from previous experiences when something's happened and it was very painful and it didn't go well and it was a bad experience. Now, it is important to remember that most experiences will be different, but there's also things we can recognize logically that are good or bad, and perhaps they're good. You know, if someone's a bad person and you see they're doing bad things, yes, okay, recognize that. Recognize patterns in things, that's good. But if we, for example, are dealing with a new person and they do something and our perception is like that person doesn't like me, or that person is being funny with me, and those sort of things, that's when it's important to recognize that we're having a reaction to something that may be in no way related to what we perceive it as. So just to go back a moment, the reaction we get is not always true. The reaction we get is always our own perception of a situation and not necessarily what it means to the other person. So the first thing I want to say is that's helped me is, if I have a concern or if something feels a certain way to me, and if you're dealing with a person that you can't communicate with, and perhaps it's a friend, a family member, or in a relationship, it is worthwhile saying, look, I'm upset. This situation, the thing you said, the thing you did has actually upset me, because when you do this, it makes me feel that you don't care, or that to me that feels disrespectful, and it makes me feel like you don't value my opinion, or something like that. It's worth just trying to communicate. Now, the other person now has an opportunity to say, look, I was frustrated, or no, that's absolutely not what I mean. I'm just wondering if, or my point was. And it opens communication, and it opens an opportunity to understand somebody better and also understand who somebody else is. Because, you know, I think that's really important to truly navigate things in life in a reasonable way. Now, there are other times where I feel a trigger, but I know it's just my emotional response to something, and it is unlikely to really have that much to do with the other person. The other thing that will help in kind of processing our reactions to things is understanding that emotions are also a temporary thing, and that initial emotion, if we get triggered, is often unconscious and it's just wiring. It's not always a smart thing. So I have learned to recognize that there's a strong emotion coming up within me, and perhaps I've explained something to someone else, but they're still not getting it. That's okay. At that point, I say, okay, I've said my bit, or okay, I feel this way. I know this emotion is temporary, and I know this emotion will probably go through a powerful period, then it will subside, and then I'll feel a little bit more clear, and then maybe subside a little bit, and then I'll get to a place where I can clearly express my emotions. And I feel like this also helps me not get into an argument with people, not get myself upset, not get myself worked up about things. So I would say the most important thing I try and do is recognize that I am reacting to something else. it may not be in that moment. My reactions could be very, very impulsive and sort of very automatic, and often not the most accurate response, if you like. You do have to do quite a bit of self-discovery to get to this point, I would say, and you do have to try and understand yourself and do some of the background work. And that's a different topic for a different video, but I do certainly try and remind myself that that initial response, that initial reaction I have to something happening, it's a automatic thing that might not always make sense and might not always be the most appropriate thing and might not always be the truth of what's happening. There may be reasons why that situation's happened. There may be reasons someone else has for their actions, and they may have nothing to do with me. So it's really important to remember that fact. And then the emotions I come up with, I let myself sit with those, but I also let myself go through the process of that emotion. So it may come up, then perhaps it helps me to express to the other person that I feel a little bit upset of what's happened, and explain why I feel upset, but then kind of leave it again and not get into an argument match, not get into an angry, falling out, leaving, arguing, I don't know, all of the things that we can do when we're in a heated sort of frame of mind. And then what most often happens is emotions and reactions are so instinctual and not necessarily based on the reality of the current present situation, that I always find that by the time it comes to the morning, or by the time I've had a few hours to sort of like wind down, I do feel different and I feel calmer, and it's an opportunity to communicate. Now, I have learned this about myself, but I can now also relate that to other people. So I feel like we can have reactions to things, and I feel, a lot of us not everybody's good at like self-reflection and realizing that in that moment they operated from an automatic place. And I think even other people, when I let them absorb and let them have their moment, and I don't say let them because it's not like down to me, but I appreciate that they may not have the best mechanism to respond in that moment, instantly. And it's the same with, even things in life where you want to give people time to process. It applies in everything. It's like nobody likes being surprised by things. Nobody likes being shocked by things. We often will react a certain way to whatever happens in that moment because we may not have time to really process and really figure out how we feel, so we just react. And I have also learned in life that it's important to let people process things themselves. It's important to be confident and comfortable in myself and know that that's just a process. In the moment, we're not very good at just responding intelligently, sometimes responding reasonably. Certain situations, they do challenge us, and we have to think different, and we have to think of someone else's point of view and someone else's perspective, and that can take time. Some people, they'll understand your point of view within hours. Some people, they'll need days to really come around to your way of thinking, or even consider your point, or even sit and think about something that they perhaps never really considered. And I also think that's part of getting to know the world. That's part of getting to know the people you're dealing with. That's part of working together. And I just find like this is a really helpful mindset that I have only learned through trying to work on my emotional intelligence and my emotional management, which has made a massive difference in my life. So yeah, basically, if you feel yourself triggered emotionally and you feel upset and you feel angry in the moment, and something's caused you to do that quite sort of instantly, it's important to remember that's an emotional reaction. It's not always the smartest thing because you haven't really had time to really process or think about whatever's come your way. So knowing that your emotional reaction is temporary and it will probably go through a bit of a process until you get to the calmest and most reasonable place where you can deal with what's just happened. And then it takes pressure off you a little bit to know the right thing in that moment and to react the perfect way in that moment. Often we just don't. And that's just That's just human. So allow yourself to be upset and accept that that's how you feel. You feel triggered in that moment. There's a reason for it. Often when we get triggered, it's because there's something that we are putting onto the situation. It's a feeling, a memory, an experience, a kind of conditioning we have in ourselves why we're reacting to a certain situation that way. It's important to give ourselves the time to process. And it's important to, once we've processed and explained that to the other person and tried to, express ourselves, it's also then important to give the other person the time to process what you see and feel and how you view that situation. And sometimes it can be a process where you are getting to know something, processing, responding. Then the other party will process, get back to you, respond. And patience with ourselves, patience with other people, patience with other individuals in life. This can apply to business, friendships, people, in personal, intimate relationships. All of these, patience is really important because, I don't know about you, but I don't think anybody really likes being forced or pushed, and even if you did not mind it, chances are you are going to feel a little like you were, long term, you could feel resentful. You could feel like, you did everything for someone and you did what was expected and you didn't get what you want, etc. That's, again, another conversation for another video. But patience is important, and giving ourselves the time and the space and giving other people the time and the space, respecting that, so they can process and they can respond, and so we can process and we can be respectful as well, and not blamey, not judgy, not kind of angry at things that often we can totally misunderstand and just take it the wrong way. And also being able to appreciate that there are always two sides to anything. And, if the person in our life, the situation we're dealing with, is something that we would want to grow, and if it's important to us, I think being able to do this is really important, because it's impossible to grow if we're not willing to kind of understand someone else's point of view or understand the situation around us. And that takes a lot of sort of self-awareness, self-control, self-regulation. It could even apply to a job. It could apply to anything. And if you see that, you've approached the situation reasonably, you've been clear, you've respected the other person's feedback, but it's not really progressed, and you do feel like you're still not getting anywhere, then you've got a choice. You've got decisions to make. And when you're in that state, it puts you in a better position to make smart decisions rather than reactive decisions. Reactive decisions are often, they can just be misled, let's say. So, but if you maintain control and regulation over yourself and learn to look at things with a calmer mind and a more detached mind to a certain extent, then it allows you to make better decisions and to just be a little bit more in control in all aspects of your life. Hope you found that interesting. And again, if you enjoy, subscribe, hit the notification bell, and I will see you in the next one. Have a wonderful day, everybody. Bye-bye.